I stood in Grandpa's machine shed, watching my cousin Bradley appraise the 1952 Ford 8N tractor with the disdain of someone who'd never appreciated anything that couldn't be converted into immediate cash. The red paint had faded to rust patches, and the engine leaked oil onto the concrete floor, but this machine had been Grandpa's pride and joy for over 70 years. "The tractor is worthless," Bradley announced, with the authority of someone who'd driven down from Chicago specifically to claim valuable assets from our grandfather's estate. "Maybe $50 for scrap metal, but nothing more. You can have it, Jake, since you're the one with farming fantasies." Day. At 26, I'd been working alongside Grandpa since childhood, learning every aspect of his small Iowa farm, while Bradley pursued his MBA and built a successful consulting business that kept him far from rural life. The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench, but I remained silent while he continued his inventory of items worth claiming. Bradley had arrived the day after Grandpa's funeral, armed with legal documents proving his status as primary heir, a position he'd secured through years of strategic visits and careful cultivation of the old man's affections. His business success and urban sophistication had apparently impressed Grandpa more than my daily presence and agricultural dedication. "I'll take the newer equipment, the land, and anything with actual value," Bradley continued, consulting a list he'd prepared with the thoroughness of someone liquidating a business. "This old junk isn't worth the cost of hauling it to auction." The old junk included the tractor that had taught me to love farming, the machine that Grandpa had maintained with religious devotion despite its age and mechanical quirks. Every spring, he'd spent weeks rebuilding the engine, replacing worn parts and adjusting systems that younger farmers would have abandoned decades ago. "Thanks," I managed to say, though accepting his cast-off felt like taking charity from someone who'd stolen everything that mattered. "I'll make sure it stays running." Bradley's laugh held no warmth as he marked the tractor off his list and moved on to evaluate equipment that could generate real money in the estate liquidation he was planning. Time to Chapter 2, The Legacy Lost. 3 weeks after Grandpa's funeral, I watched Bradley's moving trucks carry away farming equipment, household furnishings, and personal belongings that represented 8 decades of rural life lived with purpose and integrity. The systematic removal of everything valuable left the farmstead feeling like a ransacked museum, stripped of artifacts that told the story of our family's agricultural heritage. The farmhouse, that had been the center of holiday gatherings and summer visits, would be sold to developers who planned to subdivide the property into suburban lots. The fields where Grandpa had grown corn and soybeans would sprout houses instead of crops, another piece of Iowa farmland lost to urban sprawl that valued short-term profits over long-term agricultural productivity. "You understand why I had to make these decisions," Bradley had explained during his final visit, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor by explaining obvious financial realities. "Grandpa was sentimental about farming, but the numbers don't lie. This land is worth more as real estate than agriculture." I'd helped load the moving trucks, because refusing would have meant losing access to the few items Bradley had deemed worthless, including the old Ford tractor that now sat alone in the empty machine shed like a monument to better times. The building echoed with memories of Grandpa's voice explaining engine mechanics and agricultural techniques that had sustained our family for generations. The irony that I'd inherited only the equipment Bradley considered valueless wasn't lost on me, though it did reflect our different relationships with Grandpa's legacy. Where I saw history and potential, Bradley saw outdated machinery that couldn't compete with modern farming equipment or generate returns that justified storage and maintenance costs. Standing in the empty shed that afternoon, I ran my hands over the tractor's worn steering wheel and cracked seat, feeling connected to the thousands of hours Grandpa had spent operating this machine. His presence seemed to linger in the familiar controls and hand-polished surfaces that showed evidence of 7 decades of careful use and maintenance. That evening, I arranged to have the tractor transported to my own small farm, where it would receive the care and respect that Bradley's urban lifestyle couldn't provide. Chapter 3. Bringing it home. The old Ford looked out of place in my modern machine shed, its vintage design and hand-painted repairs contrasting sharply with the computerized tractors and GPS-guided equipment that characterized contemporary farming. But something about its presence felt right, as if Grandpa's spirit had finally found a home where agricultural traditions were still valued over profit margins. I spent the first evening cleaning decades of accumulated grease and dirt from surfaces that hadn't been properly detailed since Grandpa's arthritis had made such maintenance difficult. Under layers of grime, the original red paint emerged in patches, revealing the pride that had once characterized this machine's appearance. The engine compartment told a story of countless repairs and modifications that Grandpa had performed over the years, each improvement reflecting his intimate knowledge of mechanical systems and his determination to keep antique equipment functioning long past its expected lifespan. Hand-formed gaskets, custom brackets, and jury-rigged solutions demonstrated the ingenuity that rural mechanics had developed before replacement parts became readily available. As I worked, I remembered summer afternoons when Grandpa had taught me to change oil, adjust carburetors, and troubleshoot electrical problems using nothing but basic tools and accumulated wisdom. Those lessons had seemed academic at the time, but now they provided practical knowledge needed to restore this machine to working condition. The fuel tank required cleaning, the hydraulic system needed new fluid, and the electrical wiring showed signs of age-related deterioration. But the engine block appeared solid, and the transmission engaged smoothly when I tested the clutch and gear selector mechanisms. "She's got good bones," I said aloud, using Grandpa's favorite expression for describing equipment that was worth rebuilding despite obvious cosmetic problems. My wife Sarah joined me in the shed after dinner, bringing coffee and cookies while expressing curiosity about the project that had consumed my attention since the tractor's arrival. "Bradley really didn't want this?" she asked, studying the machine with the practical eye of someone who'd grown up on a farm and understood the value of reliable equipment regardless of age or appearance. "He couldn't see past the rust and oil leaks," I replied, wiping my hands on a shop rag while planning the restoration work that would return this tractor to full functionality. Chapter 4. The First Surprise. 3 days into the restoration project, I discovered the first indication that Grandpa had hidden something important within the tractor's mechanical systems. While cleaning the air filter housing, my fingers encountered a small metal container wedged behind the filter element, positioned where it would be invisible during casual inspection but accessible to someone performing thorough maintenance. The container was a waterproof capsule about the size of a prescription bottle, sealed with electrical tape that had protected its contents from moisture and contamination for an unknown period. Inside, wrapped in oiled paper, I found a handwritten note bearing Grandpa's distinctive script and dated just 3 months before his death. "Jake, if you're reading this, then you're the one who ended up with the old Ford, which means Bradley took everything else like I expected he would. This tractor holds secrets that he doesn't know about, information that could change everything about how our family's estate was divided. Keep looking, especially in places where only a real mechanic would think to search. The truth about my final wishes is hidden where greed can't find it. Love, Grandpa." The note sent excitement racing through my chest, while raising troubling questions about the inheritance arrangements that Bradley had claimed were straightforward and legally unassailable. If Grandpa had hidden additional information within the tractor, it suggested his public will might not represent his complete final wishes. I examined the container more carefully, noting that its placement required intimate knowledge of the tractor's design and access to tools that most people wouldn't possess. The location suggested Grandpa had planned this concealment carefully, choosing a hiding spot that would only be discovered by someone who truly understood and cared for the machine. The note's reference to places where only a real mechanic would think to search implied additional hidden compartments or secret storage areas within the tractor's complex mechanical systems. Grandpa's lifetime of equipment maintenance had given him encyclopedic knowledge of hiding places that urban relatives would never consider. That evening, I studied maintenance manuals and parts diagrams, planning a systematic search of every compartment, housing, and enclosed space within the tractor's framework. If Grandpa had hidden more secrets, methodical investigation would eventually reveal them. Chapter 5. The Engine's Secret. My search of the tractor's hidden compartments intensified over the following week, focusing on areas that required mechanical expertise to access safely. The hydraulic system, transmission housing, and electrical components all yielded small caches of information, including photographs, letters, and documents that painted a complex picture of family relationships I'd never understood. The most significant discovery came when I removed the engine's valve cover to inspect internal components that Grandpa had always maintained himself. Wedged between cylinder head bolts, protected by a custom-fabricated metal sleeve, lay a rolled document that appeared to be much more substantial than the previous notes I'd found. Unrolling the papers carefully revealed a handwritten will dated 6 weeks before Grandpa's death, bearing his signature and those of 2 witnesses whose names I recognized as neighbors who'd known our family for decades. The document was clearly labeled as a codicil to his original will, containing provisions that dramatically altered the inheritance arrangements Bradley had been so confident about claiming. According to this hidden will, the farm and all agricultural equipment were to be left to me, recognizing my demonstrated commitment to preserving our family's farming heritage. Bradley would inherit financial assets and personal property, but the land and farming operations would pass to someone who understood their agricultural rather than developmental value. I have watched Jacob work alongside me for 20 years, learning every aspect of farming with dedication that his cousin has never shown toward rural life, the document stated in Grandpa's careful handwriting. Bradley views this farm as real estate to be liquidated, while Jacob sees it as a legacy to be preserved for future generations. The will included specific references to Bradley's statements about converting farmland to suburban development, suggesting that Grandpa had been deeply troubled by his grandson's plans to destroy agricultural heritage for short-term profit. Most importantly, the document contained detailed instructions about where additional evidence could be found to support its authenticity and legal validity. Grandpa had apparently anticipated challenges to his final wishes and had prepared comprehensive documentation to protect his intended inheritance arrangements from family members who might dispute them. I photographed every page before carefully returning the will to its hiding place, knowing that premature revelation might give Bradley time to develop counter-strategies or destroy evidence that supported Grandpa's true intentions. Chapter 6. Building the Case. The additional evidence Grandpa had referenced was hidden throughout the tractor's mechanical systems, creating a treasure trail of documentation that revealed the depth of his planning and his determination to protect agricultural land from development. Each discovery strengthened the case for his authentic final wishes while demonstrating the systematic way he'd prepared for potential legal challenges. Medical records from Dr. Peterson confirmed Grandpa's mental competence during the weeks leading up to his death, including specific evaluations that contradicted any claims about diminished capacity or undue influence. The documentation showed that he'd requested these assessments specifically to prevent challenges to his estate planning decisions. Recorded conversations revealed Bradley's increasing pressure on Grandpa to sell farmland to developers, including specific threats about forcing the sale through legal mechanisms if inheritance arrangements didn't favor liquidation over preservation. The recordings painted a disturbing picture of elder abuse disguised as family financial planning. "You're being stubborn about this, Grandpa," Bradley's voice came through clearly on one recording. "The farm is worth $3 million as development property, but you're wasting that potential by clinging to outdated ideas about agriculture." Grandpa's responses showed remarkable patience, despite his grandson's aggressive attempts to manipulate him into abandoning plans to preserve farmland for future agricultural use. His refusal to sell productive land to housing developers had clearly frustrated Bradley's expectations about eventually controlling valuable real estate. The hidden documentation also included correspondence with attorneys who'd helped Grandpa structure his estate to protect agricultural assets from family members who didn't understand or appreciate farming life. The legal advice had guided his decision to create multiple wills, with the public version serving as a decoy, while the authentic document remained hidden until discovered by someone who truly cared about the tractor and its secrets. My evening hours were spent organizing this evidence into a comprehensive file that would support legal challenges to Bradley's inheritance claims. The systematic documentation would be crucial for proving that Grandpa's hidden will represented his genuine final wishes, rather than confused thinking or family manipulation. Chapter 7. Legal Revelation. Armed with Grandpa's hidden will and supporting documentation, I made an appointment with Margaret Foster, the attorney who'd handled our family's legal affairs for over 30 years. Her reaction to the evidence I presented confirmed that Grandpa's planning had been both thorough and legally sophisticated. "This is extraordinary documentation," Margaret said after reviewing the hidden will and supporting materials. "Your grandfather anticipated every possible challenge to his estate plan and prepared evidence that would be very difficult to dispute in court." The legal implications were significant and immediate. Bradley's assumption of ownership based on the public will would be challenged by a document that better reflected Grandpa's true intentions and included more recent provisions that superseded earlier arrangements. "We need to file this codicil with the probate court immediately," Margaret continued, "and request a restraining order preventing any further liquidation of estate assets until the inheritance dispute can be resolved." The timing was crucial because Bradley had already listed the farmland with real estate agents and had begun negotiating with developers who wanted to convert agricultural property to suburban housing developments. Stopping those transactions would require swift legal action backed by compelling evidence of Grandpa's actual final wishes. Margaret's phone call to Bradley's attorney was brief but explosive, his voice loud enough for me to hear angry denials and threats to fight any challenges to inheritance arrangements that had seemed legally settled. The confidence that had characterized his behavior since Grandpa's death cracked noticeably when confronted with evidence he'd never known existed. "Bradley will need to halt all sales proceedings immediately," Margaret informed me after ending the call. "If he continues trying to liquidate estate assets based on a superseded will, he could face legal consequences for acting beyond his authority as executor." The discovery of Grandpa's hidden will had transformed a straightforward inheritance into a complex legal battle that would determine whether agricultural heritage would be preserved or destroyed for real estate development. 2 days later, Bradley appeared at Margaret's office with his own attorney, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled anger at having his plans disrupted by evidence he'd never anticipated. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. Bradley's meeting with Margaret and me was tense from the moment he entered the office, his expensive suit and aggressive demeanor emphasizing the gulf between his urban lifestyle and the rural values that had shaped Grandpa's final decisions about the farm's future. "This whole thing is ridiculous," Bradley declared before anyone else could speak. "Jake obviously planted these documents in the tractor after Grandpa died. There's no way the old man would have hidden a will in farm equipment." Margaret's response was swift and professional, presenting evidence that would be difficult for Bradley to dispute, despite his desperate attempts to invalidate documentation that threatened his inheritance expectations. "The handwriting analysis confirms that these documents were written by your grandfather," Margaret explained, "and the witness signatures have been verified by neighbors who remember the signing ceremony that took place in his kitchen 6 weeks before his death. The medical records proving Grandpa's mental competence during his final months were particularly damaging to Bradley's attempts to challenge the hidden will's authenticity. Dr. Peterson's evaluations showed cognitive abilities that exceeded those of many people half Grandpa's age. Bradley's attorney reviewed the evidence with growing reluctance, clearly recognizing that challenging such comprehensive documentation would be expensive and likely unsuccessful. The systematic way Grandpa had prepared for legal disputes suggested he'd anticipated his son's reaction and had taken steps to prevent interference with his true intentions. "Even if these documents are authentic," Bradley's attorney said carefully, "my client has already invested significant time and money in estate liquidation based on the will that was filed originally." Margaret's smile held no warmth as she responded to this desperate attempt to maintain Bradley's position despite overwhelming evidence that his inheritance assumptions were wrong. "Your client's premature actions in trying to liquidate estate assets don't create legal obligations for the true inheritor," Margaret replied firmly. "Jacob will inherit the farm according to his grandfather's actual final wishes, regardless of any inconvenience this might cause for development plans." The meeting concluded with Bradley's attorney requesting time to review the evidence more thoroughly, but his tone suggested he was preparing for negotiation rather than continued legal challenges. Chapter 9. Resolution and Restoration. 6 months after discovering Grandpa's hidden will, the legal challenges had been resolved in my favor, and the farm that Bradley had planned to sell to developers was once again operating as a productive agricultural enterprise. The court had ruled that the hidden will represented Grandpa's authentic final wishes and superseded all previous estate planning documents. Bradley's attempts to challenge the decision had failed spectacularly when additional evidence emerged, proving that he'd known about Grandpa's opposition to development but had hidden those conversations from the probate court. His credibility as executor had been so damaged that he'd eventually agreed to settle rather than face potential perjury charges. The old Ford tractor now occupied a place of honor in my restored machine shed, its engine completely rebuilt and its original red paint gleaming under fresh coats of enamel that matched the factory specifications from 1952. The restoration had taken months of careful work, but the results honored Grandpa's memory while preserving a piece of agricultural history. More importantly, the farm was thriving under management that prioritized soil conservation and sustainable agriculture over maximum short-term profits. The fields that Bradley had wanted to convert to suburban housing were producing record yields through careful crop rotation and modern farming techniques that enhanced rather than depleted the land's productivity. Sarah and I had moved into the farmhouse that Grandpa had built with his own hands, raising our 2 young children in rooms where 4 generations of our family had learned about responsibility, hard work, and the satisfaction that came from caring for land and livestock. "Grandpa would be amazed by what you've accomplished here," Sarah observed, as we watched our children play in the barnyard where I'd spent my own childhood learning about farming from the man who'd shaped my understanding of agriculture and family responsibility. The hidden will had preserved more than just farmland. It had protected a way of life that connected us to previous generations, while providing a foundation for teaching our children about the values that had sustained our family through decades of economic uncertainty and social change. Bradley's occasional Christmas cards carried polite inquiries about farm operations, but his tone remained distant and formal, suggesting that our relationship would never recover from his attempts to liquidate agricultural heritage for personal profit. Chapter 10. Teaching the Next Generation. 3 years after inheriting the farm through Grandpa's hidden will, I found myself in the familiar position of teaching young people about agriculture and mechanical skills that seemed increasingly rare in our technology-dominated world. The old Ford tractor had become an educational tool that helped visitors understand the ingenuity and craftsmanship that had characterized farming before modern equipment made agriculture more efficient but less personal. My 8-year-old son, Michael, showed the same fascination with mechanical systems that had captivated me during childhood visits to Grandpa's farm, spending hours in the machine shed, learning to identify tools and understand basic engine principles that would serve him well regardless of his eventual career choices. "Why did Great-Grandpa hide the will in the tractor?" Michael asked during one of our mechanical lessons, his question revealing the kind of curiosity that had driven my own childhood learning about farming and family history. Because he knew that only someone who really cared about the farm would take good enough care of the tractor to find his secrets, I explained, using simple language to convey complex ideas about family loyalty and the importance of preserving agricultural heritage for future generations. The story of Grandpa's hidden will had become local legend, inspiring other farming families to think carefully about estate planning and the protection of agricultural land from development pressures that threatened rural communities throughout Iowa. Several neighbors had consulted Margaret Foster about creating similar safeguards for their own family farms. The farm's success had also attracted attention from agricultural colleges studying sustainable farming practices and heritage preservation techniques. Students visited regularly to learn about crop rotation, soil conservation, and the integration of vintage equipment with modern technology that characterized our operation. "Your grandfather's legacy extends far beyond your family farm," one professor observed during a field trip that brought 30 agriculture students to learn about our conservation programs. His wisdom about protecting farmland has influenced an entire generation of young farmers who understand that preservation and profitability can work together. The educational component of our operation had become as important as its agricultural productivity, demonstrating that family farms could serve multiple purposes while remaining economically viable and environmentally responsible. Chapter 11. Full Circle. Standing in the same machine shed where Bradley had dismissed the old Ford as worthless scrap metal, I watched my children help with evening chores that connected them to agricultural traditions spanning 5 generations of our family. The tractor that had hidden Grandpa's final wishes now served as a symbol of the wisdom and foresight that had preserved our farming heritage. The farmland that Bradley had planned to convert to suburban development was producing its best yields in decades, generating enough income to support our family while funding improvements that enhanced both productivity and environmental sustainability. Modern equipment worked alongside vintage machinery, creating an operation that honored the past while embracing innovation. Sarah had developed a successful farm-to-table business that connected our agricultural production with urban consumers who appreciated knowing where their food originated and how it was grown. Her enterprise demonstrated that family farms could thrive by finding creative ways to market high-quality products to discerning customers. "The tractor really wasn't worthless after all," Sarah observed, as we watched our children learn to drive the restored Ford under careful supervision. their excitement reminding me of my own childhood fascination with farming equipment and agricultural life. The irony that Bradley's dismissal of the tractor as valueless had ultimately cost him an inheritance worth millions wasn't lost on either of us, though we tried to focus on gratitude rather than gloating about his expensive mistake in underestimating Grandpa's cleverness. Margaret Foster had become a regular visitor, often bringing her grandchildren to experience farm life and learn about agricultural practices that seemed exotic to children raised in suburban environments. Her legal expertise had been crucial in securing our inheritance, but her friendship had become equally valuable. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've built here," Margaret said during her latest visit, surveying fields and facilities that represented the successful preservation of agricultural heritage that might have been lost to development pressure. The old Ford tractor continued running perfectly, its rebuilt engine providing reliable power for tasks that didn't require modern equipment while serving as a tangible connection to the man whose wisdom had made our current success possible. Chapter 12. Legacy Lessons. 5 years after discovering Grandpa's hidden will, the farm had become a model for agricultural heritage preservation and sustainable farming practices that attracted visitors from across the Midwest. The story of the tractor that had hidden crucial family documents had inspired other farming families to think creatively about protecting their own agricultural legacies. Our children had grown up understanding that farming involved much more than producing crops and raising livestock. It required stewardship of natural resources and preservation of knowledge that connected them to previous generations while preparing them for future challenges. Michael, now 13, had developed into a skilled mechanic who could diagnose engine problems and perform routine maintenance on equipment that many adult farmers found intimidating. His younger sister Emma showed equal aptitude for animal husbandry and crop management, suggesting that the next generation would continue our family's agricultural traditions. The educational programs we'd developed had expanded to include summer camps for urban children who wanted to experience farm life and understand where their food originated. These programs generated additional income while fulfilling our commitment to sharing agricultural knowledge with people who might otherwise never connect with farming communities. Bradley's development company had eventually gone bankrupt when the real estate market crashed, costing him the financial assets he'd inherited from Grandpa's estate. The farmland he'd wanted to convert to housing developments had proven more valuable as agricultural property than as suburban real estate, validating Grandpa's wisdom about long-term investments. Success in farming requires patience and long-term thinking, I explained to a group of agriculture students who were studying our operation as part of their coursework in sustainable agriculture and family farm management. Quick profits usually come at the expense of soil health and long-term productivity. The old Ford tractor remained the centerpiece of our educational displays, its story illustrating how family wisdom could triumph over greed when preserved through careful planning and mechanical ingenuity that outsmarted those who undervalued agricultural heritage. Chapter 13. The Continuing Story. Standing beside the restored Ford tractor in our machine shed, I often thought about the chain of events that had preserved our family farm through Grandpa's clever use of mechanical hiding places and handwritten documents that revealed his true intentions for our agricultural heritage. The farm continued evolving with new technologies and sustainable practices that enhanced productivity while protecting environmental resources for future generations. Solar panels powered irrigation systems, GPS-guided planters optimized seed placement, and computer-controlled livestock feeders ensured optimal nutrition. But the fundamental values remained unchanged. Our children had begun their own families, with Michael's son showing the same mechanical aptitude that had characterized previous generations of our family. The cycle of knowledge transfer continued as each generation learned from those who came before, while adapting to changing conditions and new opportunities. Sarah's farm-to-table business had expanded into online sales that connected our agricultural production with customers throughout the region who appreciated knowing the stories behind their food. The personal connections created through direct marketing had proven more valuable than commodity sales to anonymous buyers. The tractor that Bradley had dismissed as worthless scrap metal now appeared in magazines and museum displays celebrating agricultural heritage and mechanical innovation. Its story had become a symbol of the importance of preserving family history and the wisdom that could be hidden in unexpected places. Every piece of old equipment tells a story, I explained to visitors who came to learn about agricultural history and mechanical restoration. Sometimes those stories are more valuable than the metal and engines that preserve them. The hidden will that had changed our family's destiny remained on display in our farmhouse, framed alongside photographs showing 5 generations of farmers who had worked this land with dedication and respect for its productive potential. That evening, as I performed the same maintenance routine on the old Ford that Grandpa had followed for 70 years, I felt connected to agricultural traditions that transcended individual ownership and connected us to the land that sustained our family and community. The farm that Bradley had wanted to destroy for short-term profit was now thriving under management that balanced productivity with preservation, proving that wisdom and patience could triumph over greed and impatience when given the opportunity to demonstrate their value. Thank you for listening to my story about hidden treasures, family wisdom, and the power of mechanical ingenuity to preserve what matters most across generations. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please tell me what part of the world you're listening from and share your own experiences with family heritage, vintage equipment, or inheritance challenges. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about rural life, agricultural history, and the ongoing importance of preserving farming traditions for future generations who will benefit from the wisdom of those who came before.